Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Petersen Automotive Museum Deep Dives. Today we're going to talk about the museum's 1976 Stutz d'Italia convertible. In the 1960s, American cars started to have a kind of sameness to them. They were still easily distinguishable from one another, but they really didn't have America really didn't have a luxury manufacturer to call its own. That was until a New York banker by the name of James O'Donnell had the idea in 1968 to join up with stylist Virgil Exner to create kind of a retro style car. Didn't look exactly like its original namesake, but it bore a few of the styling cues. And we're talking about the Stutz, a car that was in production from the early 20th century to about the mid-1930s. Made some of the world's most exciting cars. They won races. The car that made good in a day, that was the Stutz. And O'Donnell thought it was about time that America had a car, and what better name to use. Now, it was interesting that he chose Virgil Exner because Virgil Exner had already done a few other similar designs. Exner did the very last Bugatti to be bodied, the Type 101C, which was ultimately bodied by Ghia. He did the Mercer Cobra. He ended up doing the Duesenberg II in the mid-1960s. And he also did the Stutz. He did beginning in 1971 when the first Stutz was introduced. Now, the first modern Stutz was introduced in 1971. It was a closed car. In fact, they were all closed cars, except for very few. The original one had a divided windshield. It had blanked out rear quarters, a hardtop. But the thing that set it apart was what set all Stutzes apart. And that was the freestanding headlights and the grille that was reminiscent of the original Stutz grille from the classic era. The Stutz also captured the fender line of the classic era in the side feature that swoops down over the front wheel to the front of the, just in front of the rear wheel and then up and over. I think you can kind of picture the running board of the day. And this is kind of a vestigial representation of the running board, a chrome embellishment that's attached to the door. And another thing that Stutz didn't have in the day, but that was very much connected with cars, the grand classics of the 20s and 30s, were outside exhaust pipes. So what we have here is a car that embodies a lot of vintage characteristics, a lot of period ideas, but on a modern platform. And that modern platform was a Pontiac Grand Prix. A simple Pontiac underneath all this loveliness. The first one cost $300,000 to build, custom by Ghia of Italy. But by the time this one came out, this one was being built by Saturn, Carrozzeria Saturn in Italy. And they were expensive. They started out at $25,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. They ended up getting up to $60,000, $75,000. Depending on the body style you got, some were four-door, most were two-door. Some had a top that was kind of a basket handle, reminiscent of the early Volkswagen Golf convertibles, and some of the PT Cruiser convertibles had a kind of a built-in roll bar and a little rear section that went down if you wanted it to, and a top a forward section that could come off. But only 2 full convertibles are believed to have been built. Of the 2 convertibles thought to have been built, we believe that this is the first one. And it was originally painted white, but after it was repainted, they did not change the interior. So we believe it has the correct original cream interior with all of the gold-plated embellishments that it was delivered with brand new. This car was introduced in Beverly Hills, and in 1976, it was pronounced the world's most expensive car at $100,000. There were newspaper articles published in virtually every city. It was such an incredible amount of money for the mid-1970s. And this car is kind of in the mode of the disco era. It's like wearing a pair of platform shoes and a designer shirt and a leisure suit. But very much, again, in the 1970s idiom. But a little different because it was that rare expression of automotive exuberance. Well, when you flip to the newspaper article that showed this $100,000 car, I'm sure you wondered what you were getting for your money. Well, you were actually getting quite a bit because on top of this somewhat plebeian Pontiac Grand Prix chassis was a hand-built body complete with freestanding headlights, a vertical grille, faux exhaust flex pipes, a kind of a reminiscence of a running board, and a lot of gold-plated interior trim. Now, the gold plating wasn't done especially well. In fact, a lot of it is rubbing off. But I don't think that mattered to the first customer of this car. We believe that this car was originally ordered for Elvis Presley, who actually bought the very first Stutz, first modern Stutz in 1971, and was delivered new, not to Elvis, but it was delivered new to Evel Knievel, and then ended up the property of Wayne Newton, Las Vegas entertainer who's known for the song Dunkashane. This car was a part of Wayne Newton's collection for some time, and it ended up for sale in a Las Vegas showroom for a time. Mr. Petersen heard about it and said, you know what, that's exactly the kind of car that expresses the Southern California motoring experience. It was a convertible in an era when they had stopped making convertibles. It was expensive in a way that cars had not been expensive in a very long time. And it was really for the extroverted motorist. It was a kind of car that spoke to good times and an extroverted spirit in a day where panel vans were becoming more and more popular and people were wanting to shut out the world. Here was a convertible that let the world in, let everybody in on the fun, and proclaimed its driver as having the kind of resources and the kind of personal panache that very few others ever had. Thank you everybody for joining me on this, another edition of Deep Dives at the Petersen Automotive Museum. We'll see you next time.